Hey guys, Coach Jack here at BRX Performance, one of the performance specialists here, as well as one of the guys who helps a lot out with our force plate testing. Today we're going to go over what force plate testing is, kind of the way that we use it here within our facility, and then how we use that to help our athletes within their training. So, why do we use force plate testing? It's really for three primary reasons. We want to quantify the strength and power value. Then we want to use that to not only reference that as a point A, but then use that to monitor and use these tools to monitor over time. Right? Using data and science to help us feel how we program for our athletes. And that's the third part, is being able to take the values that we have and the findings that we find and adjusting our programs based on the feedback that we get from those tests. We actually look at normalized values here for the two tests that we primarily run. We look at the counter movement jumps, which we also do a hop test with, and then we look at the isometric mid-thigh pull, okay? Two of those tests that have been backed by research as great ways to not only analyze strength values, but those power values as well. We actually use the counter movement jump aspect to test our power value. And then we look at the mid-thigh pull, which is simply just how much force is our athlete putting into the ground. How I explain it to our athletes is, you know, you have the mid-thigh pull, and the mid-thigh pull is our ceiling, right? What is our capacity for strength? If someone does have that large, high capacity for strength, then we are going to work at the inverse and say, okay, now they have this strength, how well can you move that strength in a powerful way? And what we can do is we can kind of look at these values to kind of almost flag their values either for good or bad. So if we look at here, we look at an athlete that may be about 6,400 watts on a counter movement jump. We know that they're really proficient on the power side of things. But what we often see is that they may be very powerful, but they may not be very strong. So we can look at it relatively. So we can look at guys who, obviously if there's a guy who weighs 225 pounds and he pulls 6,300 watts or jumps 6,300 watts, yeah, he's going to be powerful. He puts force into the ground really well. But how efficient is his movements compared to his body weight? So we can look at this for larger individuals, and we can help us standardize that when we're comparing athletes. What other variables might we look at? You know, we talk about this idea of, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is this idea of fluffy versus driver metrics, okay? When we look at fluffy metrics, honestly, like, fluffy metrics kind of just tell us one part of the story, but we also have the ability to look at other variables that tell us a deeper part of the story. You know, we can look at, when we use the hop test stuff, right, we look at reactive strength index and dynamic strength index. So it gives us an idea of what is that combination of power and strength looking like. And then we can also, when we look at just the counter movement jump side of things, we're looking at not only the eccentric properties, you know, how efficiently one is able to stop themselves and then put themselves in a propulsive state, but we can also just look at those propulsive characteristics, which applies so much to sport. We can look at both of those, and maybe we find underlying reasons as to why our strength and power values are the way that they are. Okay, so that's primarily what we look at for the counter movement jump. When we look at the isometric mid-thigh pull, we're really looking at a rate of force development. Okay, now when we talk about rate of force development, there's really two things that we can look at. Imagine that we have a spike here. So I can either go here, where this is point A, my elbow, and point by my fingertips is the highest point of force I put into the ground. Okay, we do this really quick. That's really efficient, right? If it takes us a long time to get to this point, so now we're here and we're taking 5 seconds to get to this point versus 1 second, we realize that there's an inefficiency on our strength aspect of things too, because we can get to that top point, but it may take a while. And how does that apply to sports? Think about it for the sports that you guys play in, right? Everything happens instantaneously almost, right? Within a second or two. So if we can use the values that we find and the strength that we have to get produced as fast as possible, that's when we see a good correlation with performance, okay? The last thing we want to think about is considerations. We want to do this right, you know? When we think about applying to this, we want to be able to make sure that we're having guys with correct form. We're not just putting everybody through the exact same tests all the time, because there's considerations. So we kind of talked about the fluffy and the driver metrics, kind of what we present to our athletes and what we might look at from one athlete compared to the other. And how those apply to their goals. You know, when we talk about guys who are trying to gain velocity, we might focus on the power side more. We might focus on the strength side more, because we need to get to that sweet spot where the power meets the strength, right? So we're not leaving all of our eggs in one basket. We're kind of like passing them out from piece to piece, okay? Now when we talk about what tests to implement, we might talk about training age, right? How experienced someone actually is into the gym. If we have a 12-year-old who comes in there, we're more than likely not going to mid-thigh pull them, mainly because they just don't need to. But if we have an 18, 19, 20-year-old college athlete who comes in, yeah, we can use that to assess their strength. And for the guys who are younger that just we are not going to test, we feel that they just need more time to train. And when they get a good foundation of strength underneath them through just picking up weights and just following a nice guided individualized strength program, we know that we can then throw them on a test such as a mid-thigh pull, and we can see results, and we can see probably a limited risk of injury as well. Frequency of testing is another thing that we talk about a lot, because a lot of people, again, when we talk about if we're not testing, we're just guessing, right? So if we don't do this regularly and we just make testing once in a blue moon thing, it's just a guessing game at that point. So what we do with our athletes is we test them about every 4 to 6 weeks, about every block of training that we do. So if we're testing them once a month, that allows us to not only see changes in what we're trying to accomplish, right? We might see increases in those strength and power numbers. We want to see, is the program giving us what we want to accomplish? And if not, what do we need to change within the program to make this a reality, okay? And that's the vice versa. As if we do this too frequent, we might just be testing just the test, you know? We want to find that middle ground. So when we do this about once a month, once every 6 weeks, we usually find good feedback that helps not only the practitioner and us as the performance specialist, but helps the athlete in really getting the messaging across of, hey, how dedicated have I been to my program, okay? And the last thing we want to talk about is the standardization of the tests, you know? When we look at John up here, John's getting set up in a mid-thigh pull position, and he's set up in a pretty good position. Could be set up a little better, absolutely. But standardizing hip and knee angles, if we look at Paul Comfort's research on mid-thigh pulls, a lot of his stuff shows that putting our athletes in these hip and knee angles and then cueing them to be in a certain position helps with the validity of our tests. So we can't just have a guy willy-nilly getting in there and being like this or like this, right? If we can standardize their starting position on a mid-thigh pull, we're perfect there. And that's what we talk about with the torso, the torso position, how they grip the bar, using wrist straps so grip is not a limiting factor for their performance. All of those things are things that we have to consider as practitioners when it comes to applying tests like these for our athletes. The last thing, and this is more of a counter movement jump thing rather than a mid-thigh pull thing, is the cueing side of things. Whether we do this for a counter movement jump or a hop test, right? We have to be able to cue the athlete with the right external cues so they know what we're trying to accomplish with the test. If we tell an athlete to just jump regularly on a pair of force plates, right, they might jump normally, but it doesn't show their true athleticism. So when we instead cue them to jump as high and as fast as possible, we're cueing them the idea of urgency, right? And that helps them not only use their natural stretch shortening cycle, but it allows them to just be an athlete and display those power characteristics at the forefront, rather than just focusing on the height aspect. If we emphasize the fastness of it as well, we're money, right? And then when we think about cueing as well on the hop test, it's the exact same thing, right? We can't have one guy taking forever and ever to get off the floor. I always tell guys, treat the floor like it's lava, right? I want you to be quick off the ground, get up as high as you can while being quick off the ground and treating like the floor is lava, okay? If we do that and we guide our athletes that way, the sky's the limit at that point for what we can see and what we can monitor over time. So if you guys have any other questions about not only what we do with this force plate testing, but how we can apply it to your program, be sure to like, subscribe, comment everything that you guys like and don't like and what you guys want to see more from us. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy.